Hello, and welcome to the Foundation of Faith series, The Bridge Builder's Code, Volume 1, by Jenny Jo Bingham. Today, we'll be reading Chapter 5, The Wounds That Work. Jake had driven past Marcus's house twice already. It wasn't intentional. Not exactly. The first time, he told himself he was checking if the old oak tree was still leaning too far over the roof. The second time, he justified it by claiming he needed to make sure the place still had power, though, realistically, the porch light in the middle of the day should have tipped him off. On the third pass, he pulled into the driveway. The house was smaller than he remembered. Red brick, slightly faded, with a porch swing that no longer swung, and a front step that had cracked down the middle like it was bracing for impact, much like Jake. He cut the engine and sat in silence, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping a slow rhythm on his thigh. He hadn't seen Marcus in nearly 6 years. They hadn't spoken in 4. The last time they had, their words were sharp enough to draw blood, and neither had reached for a Band-Aid. Jake still remembered the final blow, something he'd said in frustration, maybe even desperation. "You're just like Dad, only colder." And Marcus, jaw clenched, had fired back. "At least I stayed. At least I didn't abandon everything the second it got complicated." Jake had left the next morning. No goodbye, no note, and now he was back. He took a deep breath, then another, slow, steady, like he was gearing up for a demolition instead of a conversation. The porch groaned as he stepped onto it, and Jake half expected the swing to creak out a warning. Instead, it just sat there, still and slanted, like even it had run out of things to say. He knocked. Not hard, but not tentatively either. Marcus opened the door in a plain gray t-shirt, hair slightly tousled, as if he'd just woken up from a nap he didn't want to admit to taking. He stared for a second, no surprise, no smile, then stepped aside without a word. As Jake entered, he tried for a smile. "Guess I caught you off guard." "You're good at that." He stepped aside without invitation, but the door remained open behind them, a silent out if either of them needed it. The living room looked lived in, but not messy. A pair of boots by the door, a stack of mail on the table, the kind of neat that said someone kept the surfaces clear, but hadn't dusted in a while. There was a photo on the mantel. Jake recognized it. The 4 of them. Mom in the middle, Dad with a rare grin, and Jake and Marcus on either side, both still trying to grow into their ears. Jake stared at it. "Didn't think you'd still have that one." Marcus crossed his arms. "Didn't think you'd come back." Jake offered a dry smile, eyes still on the photo. "Guess we're both full of surprises." Marcus said nothing. The quiet stretched, heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Jake turned then, really looking at his brother. He was broader now, more tired around the edges, like someone who carried weight he'd stopped trying to name, and maybe that's what made the words come. "I read Dad's journals," Jake said. Marcus raised a brow. "Which one?" Jake blinked. "There's more than one?" Marcus gave a humorless chuckle. "He wrote every night after Mom passed. Filled a whole shelf in the workshop. Pastor Allen's the one who got him started. Said if he couldn't say what he felt, maybe he could build it with words." Jake's jaw tightened. "I didn't know that." "Yeah," Marcus said, quieter now. "There's a lot you didn't know." There it was, the first crack in the ice. Jake sat on the edge of the couch, posture stiff. Marcus leaned against the wall, folded like he needed something to keep him from pacing. "Look," Jake began. "I know it's been a while." Marcus arched an eyebrow. "That's the understatement of the year." They stood in the thick of it for a long beat. Nothing but the hum of the fridge and the slow groan of old pipes behind the walls. Jake cleared his throat. "I left because I couldn't stay in that house without Mom. And Dad, he wasn't the same." Marcus's voice cracked a little. "None of us were." Another pause. Not quite reconciliation, but not hostility either. Just history, finally breathing. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "You think it would have been different if she'd lived?" Marcus nodded slowly. "She was the glue." the translator. Dad loved us. He just didn't know how to reach us without her. Jake nodded. He tried, though. I see that now. In the journal. Sounds like he was trying to build more than a physical bridge. Marcus gave him a long look. So what now? You rebuild the bridge and expect us to be brothers again? Jake hesitated. No, I rebuild the bridge because something in me needs to. Us? I don't know. I'd like to try, but I know it's not that simple. Marcus nodded slowly. No, it's not. Jake walked toward the door, stopping before he stepped out. You were always the better one at staying, he said. I see that now. Marcus didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Jake stepped outside, the late afternoon sun stinging his eyes. Behind him, the door didn't close immediately. Later that night, back in the workshop, Jake sat at the bench with the journal open in front of him. His pencil hovered above the blueprint he'd started the day before, but he couldn't draw. The space around him felt different now, less like a time capsule and more like a question. The workbench creaked when he shifted, the old stool beneath him wobbling in protest, like it remembered a younger version of him with more energy and fewer regrets. His mind was stuck, not on the bridge, but on Marcus. He thought of the nights they used to build forts in the living room with couch cushions and Dad's old flannel shirts. Of the time Jake broke Marcus's bike and lied about it. Of the silent dinners after Mom died. Of Marcus standing in the doorway today, arms crossed, heart armored. He remembered the way their father sat between them at the table that first night without her, elbows on the wood, words lodged somewhere he couldn't reach. They'd all eaten in silence, the clink of the silverware louder than the grief itself. Jake had assumed the bridge would be the hardest thing to fix, but maybe the real bridges, the ones between people, had more cracks than any beam could hold. Still, something in Grace's voice echoed back to him from 2 days ago. Then we rebuild. That's what bridges are for. Jake exhaled and pressed his pencil to the paper again. He didn't overthink it this time. He was just going to let the lines fall where they needed to. Cross beams, reinforcements, the invisible structure beneath the visible one. A diagram of reconciliation, masked as engineering. This time, he began sketching a new kind of support structure. One that started with grace and didn't end in silence. As Jake rolled up the blueprints for the night, his phone buzzed. One new text. Marcus. If you're serious about rebuilding, you'll need someone who knows structural codes. I still have Dad's tools. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, heart thudding. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. And in Silver Ridge, something was more than enough to begin. The light was fading fast as Jake followed the gravel trail toward the unfinished bridge. He hadn't meant to come here. His feet had wandered while his thoughts spun. But somehow, this felt like the only place that made sense right now. And maybe he hoped Evan would be here. Rose had mentioned he still came out some nights, usually after the cafe closed and the noise of the day had settled. Like clockwork, she'd said, pouring Jake's coffee. That bridge is where he goes to think, or not think. If you plan on stopping by, you may want to get a second thermos of coffee. And remember, Evan doesn't take any sugar or cream. He drinks it black as tar. Jake clutched the thermoses in his hand like it was more than coffee, like it was a peace offering. Evan had been more loyal than he deserved, reaching out more than once after Jake left, trying to keep the thread of friendship intact. But Jake, lost in grief and spiraling guilt, had let the connection snap without even trying to tie it back together. Now, with every step, he wasn't sure if he was hoping for a reunion or bracing for rejection. Evan was one of the good ones. He just hoped it wasn't too late to prove he remembered that. The structure loomed ahead, stubborn against the skyline. Its weathered beams jutted out like ribs, half bones, half promise. And then he saw him. Evan Keller stood at the far end, hands stuffed in his work-worn jeans, shoulders hunched. He didn't turn at the sound of approaching boots. Jake stopped a few feet away and held out a thermos. Black, no sugar, Jake said softly. Same as always. Evan didn't look at him. Huh? You remembered? He took the coffee, nodding once in thanks, and turned his eyes back toward the water. Didn't bring anything sweet to chase it down? He asked, voice dry. Slipping in your old age. Jake smiled faintly. Didn't think you'd want a cinnamon scone with your existential crisis. Evan gave a short huff. Fair. Didn't expect to see you out here, Jake said. Didn't expect to want to be, Evan muttered. He took a sip, then added, This bridge meant something once. To your dad, to this town, maybe even to us. But it's been rotting longer than it ever stood solid. I know, Jake said, voice low. I should have come back sooner. Evan turned then, sharp and tired all at once. The lines in his face were deeper than Jake remembered, not from age, but from carrying things alone. Should have doesn't change a thing, man. You disappeared. After your mom died, after everything, just gone, like none of it mattered. Jake winced. I didn't know how to stay. Every piece of this town reminded me of her, and reminded me of how little I felt without her. So I ran. I tried to bury myself in blueprints and deadlines. But nothing I built out there ever felt like this. Yeah, some best man you've turned out to be. You missed my wedding, Evan said. I know. I'm sorry. You missed my divorce, too. Jake looked down at the boards beneath them. I don't have any excuses. Just tons of regret. For just a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind stirred around them. The river below whispered things neither one knew how to say out loud. Evan finally exhaled hard and looked out toward the unfinished span. I thought finishing this bridge might fix something in me, he said. Like if I could get it done, it'd close the gap your dad left. But every time I picked up a hammer, it felt wrong. Like I wasn't the one meant to finish it. Jake glanced at him. Because I was. Evan gave a short nod. Your dad used to say it all the time. Jake's got the vision. He's going to build things that last. He believed in you, even when you didn't. Evan paused, then added quietly, I didn't believe him at first. Thought he was just being your dad. But after he died, watching you step into it, seeing how much of him is in you, I get it now. Jake stepped closer, setting his own thermos on the railing beside Evan's. I don't know if I have that vision anymore, he admitted. But I do know I'm tired of leaving things undone. I want to finish this bridge, not just for him, for us, for this town. Evan studied him for a long beat. You sticking around this time? Jake met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Evan took another sip, then smirked. All right then. We start tomorrow. Daybreak. Jake smiled faintly. Don't be late, Keller. Evan chuckled into his coffee, amused that Jake would even suggest he might be late. I'm never late. You're just early and dramatic. Jake shook his head. Still the same sarcastic foreman. And you're still the architect with no sense of schedule, Evan sipped again. Some things don't need fixing. They stood in the silence for a while, side by side, watching the sky fade to indigo. The half-finished bridge stretched before them, not as a monument to regret, but as a map for what could still be mended. And that is the end of Chapter 5. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.